Hi, I'm Mark Barlow. I'm one of the partners at InfoSec. Just like to share some thoughts on what is cybercrime and cybersecurity. One of the questions we often get confronted with is from clients or potential clients who really question why they need it. They might work in an industry that is considered fairly benign. They may be of a size where they think the big cybercrime people aren't going to be interested in them. And if we step back to kind of a higher level, as long as someone has had something of value, someone else has wanted to pinch it. That's just a fundamental law that has existed, a law of nature that's existed forever. And there's also a great quote from the American bank robber Willie Sutton. It was back around the 1900s. He was questioned why he robs banks. And his answer was, because that's where the money is, which kind of makes a lot of sense. And when you translate that into today's terms, there is so much value in data. It has become a new currency and it has genuine value. So why do cyber criminals go after organizations? Because that's where the data is. And extrapolate that out to data means money. So, in today's world, pretty much everyone, every organization, and even individuals have something that's of value to a criminal. Take into the real world, there's criminals after something of value that you may have. What would you like to do to protect that? And they may use computers and cyber means to go about extracting that thing of value from you. Who are these cyber criminals? And why do they do what they do? What's the intent behind it? Take it up to a high level. They're just thieves. Their motivations are similar to the thieves, the criminals that we have in the physical world. They just use the internet and computers, etc., as their means of going about it. And they also have some real advantage compared to being a criminal in the physical world. Physical world, to break in, steal something from your house, if you to go there, break in, etc., leave, then try to on-sell whatever they pinched. Where in the cyber world, they can pretty much break into multiple houses at the same time from the comfort of their lounge. It really has an economy of scale that just isn't there in the physical world, which is why criminals have turned to cybercrime. Is I kind of break them down into three simple groups. I've seen some matrices that they have dozens of different threat actors and their motivations, etc. I just put it into three groups. There's the nuisance end of the market, and in the physical world, these would be taggers and protesters and things like that. A website defacement. In the physical world, that's a tagging. Yes, it is convenient. Yes, it is embarrassing, and all the things that go with that. But actually, it's fairly low grade and low sophistication. Things like denial of service can be very disruptive, no denying that. But again, I liken that to protest action. You have protesters blocking a street or blocking the entrance to a shop, something like that. They may have different motivations, but effectively a denial of service kind of sits in that same sort of area. And the thing with taggers and protesters and things like that, at some point, they get hungry and go home. It kind of goes away. It's not to say that there aren't things you can do to prevent it, but it's by and large taken care of through automated tools. The next group I consider are the true cyber criminal. There's been a big shift to this becoming highly organized. These are the crime gangs, and they operate all around the world. I don't think it's fair to point to a particular nation or location. And in their world, the internet is just one place, so it doesn't really matter where they're located. They can just go about their business freely. Their motivation is primarily financial gain, very, very similar to what it is in the real world, and it is highly lucrative for them and with a fairly low risk and low barrier to entry. For those that are criminally motivated, it's a fantastic way to make a lot of money for very little effort. Examples you see there are the other ransomware type things where someone encrypts your files, so they lock your files up. Effectively, they kidnap them and then they hold them to ransom. So they're extorting money out of you. That's just classic criminal behavior, and it's been there forever. And then the third group that I consider falls into this nice term of advanced persistent threat. Typically, this is the highly motivated organized crime group, potentially, but also state actors. And there's a bit of a blurry line in some areas between the two. And across these three groups, you should consider there's a bit of a continuum where they do overlap to some degree. But the key difference between a cyber criminal and a persistent threat is the cyber criminal have a crack. They want to try to extort, but they're relying on law of averages. Someone is going to be vulnerable and someone's going to pay the money, where the persistent threat is going after something quite specific and for a specific reason. So they get up in the morning to go about their business, and a few locks on the doors, a few things to prevent them aren't going to stop them doing that. So that's where the persistent threat end of the market is quite a serious thing to counter, and that's something that needs to be considered and how it applies to your organization. Then the question is, what do they want, and why are they going about what it is that they're doing? At the most basic level, there are elements of self-fulfillment. It's that's the taggers. They want some sort of recognition, etc., and some sort of achievement, maybe by breaking things. So if they can break into your website and deface it, they get some sort of pleasure from that or something. Then that kind of heads through to basically pinching customer data. So grabbing customer data, they can then use for some sort of scamming, some sort of extortion. It can be used to form a phishing type attack. That's those emails that you get that pretend to come from your bank or something like that. And from that, if they sort of move through to, if they can access and steal that data, then that gives them something of value, something that they can then sell within sort of the black market that exists in this area. So it could be identity information, credit card information. All of those things have some sort of value associated with them. And this is why the question as to who is a target becomes so broad. If you are storing some sort of customer data, that could be used to form an attack or lead to something that could be sold. That's of interest. That has some sort of value to the criminals. This information that's stolen is then used often to commit some sort of invoice type fraud. And this is where the money starts to become real. If a cyber criminal can send a fraudulent invoice to an organization and get that invoice paid, and get paid in a way that the money can't easily be retracted, it starts to become quite a good payday for them. And that whole general sort of financial fraud becomes the bread and butter for that cyber criminal, that organised crime sort of group. So whether it be credit card theft, theft of credentials that can be used to open bank accounts or retrieve money from people's bank accounts, there's a whole bunch of ways they can go about stealing money. Going back to that Willie Sutton quote, that's the thing that they're after. And another highly effective way they have, and we're seeing this all the time, it is frequently in the news now, is the extortion, the ransomware. And that's highly lucrative. This is where the criminals encrypt your files, so they lock them up. So effectively they're holding your files to ransom, and then they extort some money out of you in return for releasing their files or releasing your files. Easy to do, highly effective, but equally quite easy to prevent. This important thing to remember here is that a lot of the things that the cyber criminals in particular do have a degree of opportunistic intent sort of sitting behind them. If they get away with it, great. If they can't, if there's something that prevents it, they'll move on to the next victim. Then we go to the far right, the most sophisticated, and this is theft of IP, theft of massive amounts of data for some sort of perhaps corporate gain or foreign interference, some sort of foreign state gain or competitive advantage. At this end, it is very sophisticated. They're not easily deterred, but there are ways and methods that can be used to help reduce the likelihood and the impact of this type of threat. A question we often get asked by our clients is, okay, that's cool, but my business isn't a target. It's not going to be a target. Why should I care about this? It's not hard for criminals to find your business. They're going to go the same way the customers do. You've got search engines. If you want customers to find you, cyber criminals can find you too. Cyber criminals are constantly scanning the internet for opportunities, and opportunities in their world are computers which have vulnerabilities. They're not well protected. They're not well configured. They might be old. You'll often hear, patch your computer, upgrade your computer. It's these computers that aren't looked after and aren't maintained are the things that the criminals use. And then they use that as a means of accessing your organization and going from there. It's kind of the equivalent to a criminal walking through a car park, flicking car doors, trying to find an unlocked car. It's the low-hanging fruit. And the easier that you make it for them, the more likely they are to have a crack, because that's just the way they operate. And the third thing to bear in mind, you may either have a supply chain or you might be part of a supply chain, and the risk that poses kind of either upstream or downstream from you. And that's where you might be in what you consider as a fairly benign industry. But if you're supplying an industry that could be of greater value, that's where you can become a target, because you could be a means to get into greater value from a criminal perspective. We often use in this kind of scenario is to consider there may be sort of 3 houses on the street. Let's bring it back to the physical world. First house essentially is unlocked, doors are open, windows are open. A burglar walking down the street is going to see it, confident no one's home, going to have a crack just to see what they can pinch, because that's kind of what burglars do. It's very opportunistic, and if they can get something out of it, great. And actually the barrier to getting in is pretty low, and it could be a good reward. If the house next door has got locks on the doors, the windows are shut, that sort of thing, the burglar needs to think twice. They've got to work a bit harder to get in. Doesn't mean they won't. An experienced burglar will have a crack and may get in, but it is making it harder, and it is causing them to stop and think, and may well deter them. If you take the third house, monitor, burglar alarm, security cameras, all the things that you want to seriously protect it. One of the reasons we put these in is as a deterrent. The other reason is to detect and to help a response. And so that means if a criminal were to try to burgle a house with these, they're up against the clock, an alarm goes, what's the response going to be? There's a whole bunch of things that happens there. If you think of those 3 scenarios from a criminal perspective, the third is clearly going to be the hardest and the one that's going to most deter them. And the first, if they can have a go, they're going to. And there's one element that really differentiates the cyber world from the physical world. We kind of know in the physical world, one way to help prevent burglary, things like that happening, is to move to a better neighborhood. You need to consider the internet doesn't really have a better neighborhood. There is only one neighborhood and we're all on it. In effect, we're all neighbors. The minute you connect, geographic, physical location no longer becomes relevant. You're as close to your neighbor in the physical world as you are to someone on the other side of the world. And that's quite an important concept to understand when you're thinking about why would someone attack you. They don't really care where you are. If they've got a means of accessing, your house in the scenario, and you've got something of value, they'll give it a go. To come back to the criminals, the things that they're after in this sort of cyber context is your data. That's the thing that's worth money to them. That's the thing that's valuable. So that's the thing they're looking to try to grab. And data basically exists in one of 2 places. One, it exists on your devices, your endpoints, your computers, your phones. That's where your photos are. That's where your company files are. Or it exists in the cloud. Arguably it's someone else's computer, but as a principle, your data either exists on your devices or in the cloud. Then if you extend that slightly, your data can also exist in your business partners' computers and their clouds. And they in turn could be sharing it to their suppliers' computers and their suppliers' cloud. Data ends up existing in a lot of different places, and it's understanding where that is and how it's protected starts to underpin how you should approach cybersecurity. Kind of at this point, I'm going to focus a little bit more on InfoSec and what we do here. Yes, there is the wider industry, but this is where we've built our expertise and our experience. Firstly, and this is really, really important, it's not just about technology, but it really is about the people as well. That really is quite critical. I can't stress that enough. Purchasing more technology is not necessarily going to solve your problem. You need someone that can help monitor and detect and respond. People provide more novel thinking, and applying some people to the analytics is really, really critical in solving some of these problems. The criminals are people, and people understand how people think. Bringing our expertise helps sort of counter that problem at the other end. One of our technology partners, CrowdStrike, has a great saying, you don't have a malware problem, you have an adversary problem. That speaks to that. There are people at the other end having a go at trying to pinch stuff from you. So you kind of need some people at this end to help solve it. And another bit that sits behind how we go about it is an area talked about as threat intelligence. It's a term that gets used a lot, but I'm not always convinced that it's well understood. When it gets quite deep, it's looking at the adversary in quite some detail, how they go about what they do, what their motivations are, what their goals may be. To bring it back to the physical world, yes, a fence around your property is useful, but it's understanding what things the adversary might be interested in. They're probably not going to nick the wood off your wood pile. So how much effort do you put in protecting that versus, your jewelry and sort of things like that. And this is where the threat intelligence comes into it. It's really understanding why the adversary may want to go about it and really being able to distill that down and then focus security effort in the right place. To dig into that a little bit more about what we do, we sort of deconstruct the cybersecurity in various ways. Your data kind of exists in basically only a couple of places, on an endpoint or in the cloud. And there's a bit of a quirk to computers. They only do what they're told to do. A computer literally just follows a set of instructions, highly detailed instructions, but instructions. That means a human has to be behind those instructions and telling the computer what it needs to do. So when we bring this to endpoint security, we want to detect everything that occurs on the device. So to take this into a physical world, if a burglar wants to burgle your house, they have to open a door or break a window, something like that. They've got to do something to get in. So when it comes to the endpoint, to the computer, the criminal needs to tell the computer to do something in order for them to get in and do what it is they want to do. Our aim is to detect, and we use technology to do that, but to help detect everything that basically happens on the computer. So we can apply analytics to that and then identify what the bad guys are up to. So we detect, where we prevent, and we have a bit of analysis that sort of links the two. And that analysis might be very, very quick. And at times that analysis may be quite detailed. Yeah, so the smart criminals, they do a good job of disguising themselves, and they do that to remain undetected. So that's really where the expertise and things like the threat intelligence come in. And it's been able to distinguish between normal behavior and abnormal behavior. The other part is security as a team sport. It really, really is. We rely on our partnerships. That's our technical partners. And we rely on the team, and all of those things sort of come together to help us do that. So what do we do about cloud security? The vast majority of the breaches that we respond to are in the cloud and typically in Office 365. And the thing there is security is shifted to be somewhat out of your control when you use the cloud. The security controls are typically established and set up by the cloud provider, and you have to operate using their security controls. And typically this is going to be a username and password, and may or may not be an additional sort of token or passcode, something like that. There can be a tendency for people to use common passwords across multiple cloud services. So this means if one cloud service gets breached and the criminal is able to identify your password, they then potentially have access to all the other cloud services that you use. So to put that into perspective, your favorite online retailer gets hacked, your credentials get stolen, and it's the same credentials you use for your corporate Office 365. There goes your Office 365 as well. And that's a really, really bad outcome. So we can help you understand your cloud presence and give you the tools and protection needed to combat these breaches. The way we go about it is we apply security that sits between you and your cloud service. So that gives us visibility as to what is going on within your cloud environments. And that can help prevent that unauthorized access, or detect and prevent that unauthorized access. In recent times, we've all seen and read about some of the big breaches that have occurred. Locally within New Zealand, there's Fisher and Paykel, Lion Breweries, and Toll Holdings. But for all these ones that have made the news, there's so many more that don't make the news. And we know that because we're directly working with some of those organizations. And there's a few common factors to all of the breaches that you hear about, and perhaps the ones that you don't so much hear about. They're typically some sort of ransomware, typically some sort of phishing attack, or there may be some sort of invoice fraud. In our experiences, those would be the three biggest causes. And what is interesting about those three is they're all fairly preventable. One lesson we have from incident response: prevention is much cheaper. An incident looks at 4 to 5 times the cost of what it would have taken to prevent the incident, because of the effort required to investigate, analyze, put the prevention, to clean up. There's a whole lot of parts to it that really can be quite costly. And that's not to mention just simple business disruption as a result of it. And then the irony is that it's been expensive to clean it up, and then there's additional expense to then prevent it. Because if there's one thing that you should learn from an incident, is whatever security controls you had in place, they failed. And that's quite important. So to have an incident and then to rely on the same security controls that allow that incident to occur is a recipe for it to happen again. Sadly, we have seen examples, and quite public ones, of organizations being hit multiple times. So finally, area that would just bring up around policies and law. So a new privacy act has been passed, and critically that includes some provisions where breaches need to be notified where there's been some sort of harm. And from our understanding, is understood as being in the mind of the person who is affected. So it's not necessarily the organization. So it's measured by the person whose data may have been lost through the breach. This reinforces the obligation on organizations to protect their data and the data they're holding about their customers, which introduces a concept of social license. And that's the trust factor that the customers put into an organization. You may only be a pizza shop and taking online orders, but your customers expect you to protect that data. And a breach and a loss of that data may affect customers in different ways. And then that ties back to the Privacy Act. So finally, I just want to say thanks for listening in. Really appreciate your time and listen to what we have to say. This is one of a series, and in the next video, we're going to talk about what you can do to set up and set the foundations for cybersecurity. So please tune in. Thanks very much. Bye.